Let's look at the Family Search Photos section. This is a neat section where you can save your photos, and you can also do research by area and by name. On the front page of Family Search, we can click on that, and you'll see that there are several photos already uploaded on my own with family members, etc. At the top, you'll see a set of tabs. These tabs are areas where you can find stories, documents, audio, etc., albums. What you can do with these is you can store your particular photos, documents, etc., or this is my favorite right here, and that's find. What we can do when we look at our family members, say in this case I'm going to take a subject, James Kite, was born in 1714 to 1754. Let's click on his person and pull him up. And this is going to help us understand who this person was. The scriptures talk about tying our hearts to our ancestors, and knowing names and dates and places and that kind of thing are good, they're interesting, but that's not really tying our hearts together. Tying our hearts involves knowing the person and understanding about that person. So we see that James Kite here was born in 1714 in Blockley, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. It also shows that he died about 40 years later in the same place. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the photos section, and we're going to do a search. And what we're going to look for is Blockley. Got my caps on. Hit enter. Now what comes up is photos, stories, and documents. And this isn't just for Blockley, Pennsylvania. Any names that have the name Blockley in it or whatnot will also come up. So let's filter a little bit more. Let's take a look just at the photos. I'm not certain if this is a church in Pennsylvania or if this is a church in England. A lot of the old English names came from or came to America. There's a female. Let's see what her story is. So her last name would be Blockley. Okay. Let's take a look at this picture here and see what we got. Okay, so there was a Blockley, England, so that would be a home or a name that came across to Pennsylvania, so like New York, etc. Take a look over here and just kind of pick one at random and see what we come up with. So this would be from Pennsylvania, Historical Society of Pennsylvania. You can see over here. Town records, church and town records, and the Lutheran church. So this would be Lutheran baptisms. Searching down, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, etc. So when I'm looking at a person, so in this instance, James Kite, and he was from Blockley, Pennsylvania. I don't know where that's at. I know where Pennsylvania is. I've been there. I just don't know where that place is in particular. So that's where the internet is going to come into play. So let's do a little search. Blockley, Pennsylvania. And I like to throw in the word genealogy. You can use lots of different words to find different ways to look at the same problem, and you end up finding different pictures and different stories, etc. So we'll throw in genealogy, hit enter, and see what comes up. Instantly we have a Wikipedia. We'll open up that tab. We have a Blockley genealogy. I'll open up that tab. All sorts of different bits of information. Oh, and look at that. Abraham Kite. It's spelled differently. So we'll throw his name in the mix too. So just like that, we already have information on James Kite. And right here it says that he was on a plantation in Pennsylvania. So anytime you get a bit of information, it gives little strings, little tabs of other information. So we know just from looking at this header on Free Pages and Genealogy Roots Web that he was on a plantation. Well, the questions now become, what kind of plantation? What kind of plantation? What did they grow? If he's a plantation owner or a worker, is he someone who is a sharecropper? Is he someone who if he owned a plantation, he probably was somebody of some, import to that area. So let's see if there's any images. Well, just off the bat, we have there's the author of that one site. Here's her site. Here is the catalog. So nothing really great jumps out immediately. But oftentimes, just through the photos, etc., you can find all sorts of interesting information. So let's go over to and see what came up. Blockley Township, Pennsylvania. So we know that James Kite was born in 1714. So the question is what was going on in 1714? Well, we know that right then he was a British citizen, most likely. James Kite, British name, likely. And he's in America. We know that America was established in 1776. So right now, these people at this point were British citizens. So what was going on in 1714 in Blockley, Pennsylvania? Let's take a look. Township that it's now defunct, so it's no longer a township, incorporated in 1704. So what happened to where it's defunct? More questions to be answered. The name was derived from Blockley, a parish in England in Worcestershire, from which the township's founder William Warren hailed. So he came from there and brought that name with him to the new land. So that's a little bit of interesting information. Let's go over here to Blockley Genealogy. So we have an interments section, a link for there, 1790 census, but that's much later than when our subject was born and lived. So none of those really strike my fancy right off the bat. So let's take a look here. Abraham Kite, Blockley Township. So probably they're going to be related. Oh, and look. His father was James Kite Sr., born in 1656. So let's talk about something quickly, and that will be the naming pattern. Let's zoom out a little bit and go to a different page here. The naming pattern in England worked kind of like this. Find my brush. If my subject's name was James, oh boy, we're going to have to change that. Okay, we'll go with that. Good enough. And he ended up marrying a lady. Let's say her name was Sarah. Okay. As they had children, the names were very important to them. They wanted to keep these names. The reason that I bring this up is that over here we have that bit of information on Abraham Kite, and down here was James Kite Sr. So that was Abraham's father, was James. And interestingly enough, we're looking at a James Kite. If you look down here to the right in this area, you'll see that his father is in fact Abraham Kite. and Mary Peters. So this is going to be the son of Abraham, who we found on just an internet search. So going back to our naming pattern, this is what came up immediately just by seeing that. So obviously James had two parents. He had a father and a mother. And they in turn, as we all do, had a father and a mother, etc., etc. So this is how the naming pattern worked. Because the names were so important to these people, they would preserve their names with a particular pattern. So we know that James had a wife named Sarah. That didn't work. Okay. And in here we know that his father's name was Abraham. Not exactly in the box, but okay. Now the way that the naming pattern works out is this. The firstborn son, these will be the sons, he'll be named after his father. So the firstborn son here would be Abraham. Okay. The second-born son, the first and the second, would be named after Sarah's father. So say her father's name was John. His name would be John. And finally, the third-born son, the father gets his due, so his name would be James. On the mother's side, it works similarly. So if Sarah was the oldest daughter, and it worked out thusly, and her mother's name was Sarah also, firstborn daughter would be, I'll pick a different color here. Her name would be Sarah also. The second-born daughter, if this name is Mary, the second-born daughter would be after James's mother, Mary. And finally, the third-born daughter, Sarah, would get her due, but in this case it's Sarah. So we have to figure out something different for the name. What happens oftentimes is, because these names are so important to the folks, is that if they have one of these children die, say if for whatever reason Abraham passed away, they would want to preserve that name. So if he died later in life where there was already children established here, you might see within the same family another Abraham. And that's because the name is so important, family names. That's why there's so many Williams and Johns and Marys and that sort of thing, especially like within Catholic families and whatnot. So let's go back and see if this plays out at all within James Kite's family. So we have James Kite, who married Martha Wynne. We know that his father was Abraham Kite, and mother was named Mary Peters. So this one, with their firstborn daughter, we don't know if it was an exact or an about. Let's take a look. We have to take a little bit further dig, but here you have the name Mary. Over here you have the name Mary. So that plays out. Take a look over here. The firstborn daughter being named after the mother. That doesn't exactly work, but it's pretty good. Next is Abraham, firstborn son, named after his father. Second-born daughter would be Sarah, which I wonder what Martha Wynne's mom's name would be. Second-born son Wonder what her parents' name was. Maybe her dad's name's Jonathan. If so, that would work out. Third born son, that kind of throws us off a little bit. But eventually you get James Jr. So let's take a look at Martha and just kind of see. Actually, I'm going to go up here and let's see the tree. And let's see how this plays out with the naming pattern. So you have the Sarah. You have a Mary. Looks like they did it a little bit in reverse. You have an Abraham. A Jonathan, which there's a Jonathan up here. A William. Don't really know where that comes from. And then the James. And Giselle, which who knows where that came from. Let's see. Let's see if there's any aunts or uncles that they might have named them after. So they didn't necessarily keep too strictly to that, but it's still a pretty good match. Okay, so we now know a little bit more about James Kite. Where are we at here? All right. We now know a little bit more about James Kite. We know a little bit about, from these sorts of things, we know a little bit about what it was like for him, where he lived. He was a British citizen, which meant that they had to, from their plantations, send taxes, etc., back to England to the king. Eventually that didn't work out so well for the king, and pretty good for the Americans. So as you dig back at each level, you can continue to look. So now we've come to England. The family got to England somewhere between James Kite and Abraham Kite. In England, they're from Chipping-Campden, Gloucester. Which, what's great about that is now we can do another search and find out about that place. And I like to throw, as always, genealogy on there. And we see the family search itself has a nice site that tells you about it. So it'll give you the parish history down here, different registrations, different links. This is great. Parish Register Transcription Society, nice. Maps and gazetteers, websites and different references. So that's great. And as always, I like to look at images and see what's there. Now, as we're thinking about this person, now we can actually consider what life would be like for him. What was it like in Chipping-Campden then? Let's see, when was he? 1638. So 1630s, the plague had just gone through England again, and it has swept through many areas, and perhaps even Camden. Let's look up the plague. There was the major plague in the 1300s, but there's also one that swept through about between the 1600s and 1630s. So here's something from Oxford University. So now you can really dig in and see what it was like. If you can imagine being in the community where you live. I live in a community that has about 90 to 100,000 depending. If you could imagine, say, 70% of your town being decimated, who knows? I mean, just on a horrible amount of death, and it made everybody terribly, terribly afraid. And it caused a lot of change in painting and music and culture and religion. It was very, very sad. So you can see that just by starting with one person, you can begin to understand him and what it was like, why they came to America. How did they come to America? We know, for instance, he didn't fly. So how did he get here? By ship. Which way did he come? And that's something to be talked about in another short video, but hopefully this benefited you and helps you to tie yourself to your ancestors and tie your hearts together.